Grunge, from Seattle scene to mass culture. Seattle, the largest city located in the Pacific Northwestern of USA and one of the America's fastest-growing cities. Historically, the World War II brought growth to the city, but Seattle never had much of a cultural environment. No one could predict this city would be the place of the creation of one of the biggest subcultures in history, grunge. Another big contribute from the World War II to grunge was the creation of the youth culture. Teenagers, even the word itself, played an important role in grunge. Teens had now more leisure time and disposable income. In early 80s, the adolescence of those who would be part of the Seattle music scene was a mix of dropping out from school, hanging out with each other, attending gigs in local clubs and playing music together. By going to the same places, kids of punk rock and kids of metal converged. The scenes were mixing, although there was a little disdain for the punk rockers and what they represented. At that time, bands played for fun. It was an escape and yet a fantasy. Everyone relevant in grunge went to the same places and same house parties. Everyone knew each other and they would form and break up bands not only because of music skills. Primarily it was because of personal compatibility. Music is a mix between social and cultural experiences and the personalities of the musicians. It is one of the reasons most of grunge bands were always replacing their members. It was a do-it-yourself philosophy. Bands would practice in their houses, call to their friends whenever they needed a manager, a producer or a roadie. They would figure out the studios to record their demos by themselves. U-Man, Green River, Soundgarden, Malfunction, and the Melvins were the most known bands in Seattle in the early 80s. Soundgarden and the Melvins were a big influence of Nirvana. The sound of these bands was loud and fast, a complaining set to a drop-D tuning. The concerts were crazy, energetic and weird, but they were authentic and sincere. They possessed the primary aesthetic value, sincerity. The crazy performances and the gestures of the band members were part of the musical experience. It created affection and desire in the audience. Females were a constant presence at the concerts. The good look of some band members would attract them to the venues. Many argue Nirvana's success was only based on Kurt Cobain's look. A subculture was emerging. It was already possible to identify musicalized signs of identity and community. The behavior, the environment they surrounded themselves with, the weirdness and introspection of some band members, the way they dressed themselves, the crowd at the concerts, the slang, and the identification between the bands and their fans. The Seattle music scene was more than music by now. It was a lifestyle. Places like the Showbox, the Paramount Theater and the Moore were very important venues where people would hang out and watch the grunge bands perform. Actually, in 1989 Nirvana played alongside with Mudhoney and at a sold-out concert at the Moore, Lame Fest. It was also the release party of Bleach, Nirvana's first album. There are 6 people who were crucial in the Seattle scene. Susan Silver, she managed 3 of the most important grunge bands, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains and U-Man. Another person who will forever be linked to grunge is Jack Endino, a producer. He produced Nirvana's first album, and also albums of Mudhoney and Soundgarden. A scene can never last long without spreading. For more authentic a band can be, they also want to be able to live off music, and not off normal daily jobs. It is normal to occur a decentralized diffusion of the scene. It isn't very planned or controlled, but the bands must be able to project their identity beyond the immediate scene itself. Charles Peterson, a photographer, took some of the most iconic pictures of the Seattle scene and grunge bands. He could capture the essence of the concerts and the band members' personalities. His pictures also created an illusion and an augmented reality. The concerts looked crazier and more crowded in his pictures than it was in reality. Back then, posters and flyers were still a great and one of the main sources for promotion and communication. Art Chantry, album and poster designer, made some of the posters and album covers of Seattle bands. And if we talk about influential people in grunge, we have to talk about Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman. It would depend of who we talk to get positive or bad opinions about their influence. They founded the record label, Sub Pop, a music fanzine. It was how Sub Pop started, a fanzine written by Bruce Pavitt in 1980. At that time he was based in Olympia, Washington. Unlike other fanzines, This one was about bands no one heard of before. After publishing a few issues of the fanzine, Bruce put out Sub Pop 5, a cassette compilation, 9 issues, alternating from written publications to cassette versions, and 6 years later, 3 since he moved to Seattle and started writing a column called Sub Pop in the Rocket newspaper. Bruce Pavitt published a vinyl issue of Sub Pop. It was called Sub Pop 100, and included tracks from Sonic Youth from New York, Wipers from Portland and the U-Men from Seattle. In 1987 Bruce put out the Green River EP, and realized he wanted to help Seattle blow up. Bruce and Jonathan Poneman shared the same feeling about Seattle, that the underground scene was creating a unique sound. They started working together and founded the record label when both of them wanted to make a record with Soundgarden. Bruce had the knowledge and contacts, and Jonathan had the money. Together they put out a limited edition single of Soundgarden, Hunted Down Backed with Nothing to Say, and later the band's first EP, Screaming Life, and this was how the record label was created. Sub Pop was responsible for the release of the first singles and albums of the most relevant grunge bands as Nirvana, Soundgarden, Green River, Mudhoney and Tad. As any subculture, grunge rejected the mass culture. That is why some people consider Sub Pop killed the authenticity of Seattle music scene by selling it to the mainstream culture. In 1988 Seattle music scene was still very local. No one in USA was paying attention for what was going on in Seattle, not even local press. In that year, Sub Pop released Sub Pop 200, a compilation of the Seattle scene bands, but they didn't limit themselves in releasing it out as a cheap vinyl. They created a box set with a booklet, strategically written as if Sub Pop was already a big deal in music industry. At that time the Seattle sound still wasn't called grunge, but Sub Pop or Seattle sound. Sub Pop wasn't promoting any band in particular but the brand itself. They looked up for labels as Motown to create promotional strategies, alongside with Jack Endino recording techniques, and Charles Peterson photography. Sub Pop cleverly created a consistent brand, and started diffusing and creating a buzz around Seattle sound. One of the biggest tricks of Sub Pop was to create the Singles Club. People would pay up front to receive singles by the label on a monthly basis. The first single of the Sub Pop Singles Club was one of the songs that many people agree it incorporated everything grunge was about, Nirvana's single Love Gus. Another strategy of Sub Pop was to attract the attention of British press, as it happened before in history. Somehow American press become more interested in their own talent when it's recognized in foreign countries, especially the UK. They flew the journalist Everett True from the Melody Maker, and made sure he would see all of Sub Pop bands perform. After that, the British DJ John Peel played a lot of Sub Pop 200, and compared the Sub Pop sound to Motown in the Times of London that had a circulation of 2 million. After 1989 Seattle sound became grunge, not only a third sound that wasn't either metal or punk, but also the image and myth Sub Pop and the media created of Seattle bands and their members. Soundgarden was the band everyone expected to be the biggest band from Seattle. They were the first grunge band to sign to a major record label, A&M in 1988, but it was Nirvana who brought grunge to the mass culture, since Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic created the band in 1987. Nirvana had several drummers and second guitarists, but the longest-lasting and most acclaimed drummer was Dave Grohl. He joined the band in 1990 and was part of the album that brought national and international fame for Nirvana, Nevermind. The album was released on September 1991 by the major label DGC Records, which bought the group out of the contract with Sub Pop after the band's dissatisfaction with the lack of promotion and distribution of their first album Bleach. Nirvana was always a career-oriented band with strong opinions and attitudes about their future. Chris Novoselic was the one who demanded Sub Pop a record contract, the first the label did, a 3 records contract. Kurt also showed publicly he wasn't satisfied with Sub Pop. The band wasn't receiving any money and he also disliked the image that the label created of them as persons, even though some say Kurt was the one who created some of the myths and lies around himself. His personality and image certainly influenced the band's popularity. Everyone was starstruck by Kurt. He was a gifted musician and songwriter. One of his most appreciated characteristics was the ability to sing about his own life and beliefs. His lyrics ranged from exposing feminism and opposing to homophobia to personal experiences, as low self-esteem in the divorce of his parents. He created a mirror effect in a whole generation. Young people identified themselves with Kurt and his lyrics. Even before reaching the peak of popularity, Kurt had several breakdowns on stage. It was clear he was tormented. Alongside with his shyness, sensitivity and good look made people want to bring him home and take care of him. Later on he was considered the spokesman of a generation, Generation X, people born between 1960 and 1980. September 1991. It is a mark on grunge history. It was when Nirvana's album Nevermind was released, the key event that made grunge part of the mass culture. While Bleach had more angry and dark songs, Nevermind brought a more mainstream sound to the alternative rock played by Nirvana, mixing a song that appealed to teenagers, who were playing an important role in consumerism, with the aim of internationalization from the record company. The Smells Like Teen Spirit video made grunge explode by the hand of MTV. Nevermind reached the #1 on Billboard on 1992. Nirvana toured Australia and all of the sudden grunge music was accessible to the consumers everywhere, on radio, TV, record shops, and even as background sound at the shopping center stores. Media fed on grunge and the image of grunge band members as much as it could. Nirvana appeared in popular culture magazines as People's Magazine and Rolling Stone, and Vanity Fair did a spread about the grunge fashion. The glam was gone. Now it was okay not to care, not to shower for a certain number of days and not to make an effort to be dressed up. The non-fashion statement of the band members, who bought cheap and durable clothing as flannel shirts and wool cardigans, turned into a fashion style. High-fashion designers and street clothing stores created their collections around grunge. This craziness and consumerism around grunge bands made record labels hunt for bands that could become the next Nirvana. The world's circumstances as the political, economic and social situation, the song's messages, the band members' personality and look, their audience, the centralized diffusion played by their major record label and the media, all of these factors brought Seattle music scene to popular culture. After breaking the wall between grunge as a genre and the mainstream civilization, the feeling of the purists of Seattle music scene and of some bands' members can be illustrated by two of Kurt Cobain quotes. "If I went to jail, at least I wouldn't have to sign autographs," and "The thrill and embarrassment of becoming international pop stars was too much, so we opened our mouths and put our foot in sometimes." Grunge was so overconsumed that it started to lose its meaning. The consumers shifted from those who identified themselves with the music and the message, to those who simply wanted to be part of it. Even the danger that some found in grunge music was under control. The new consumers of grunge weren't bothered by the political, economic or social justice issues, but by what was sold by the mass media, the gossip and rumors about band members, especially about Kurt Cobain and his wife Courtney Love. Their life became a reality show on tabloids. Even Kurt's alleged suicide became a spectacle. The initial message against stereotypes, homophobia and sexism turned into the cult of personality and glamorization of drugs. Everything the initial scene repelled. This loss of meaning and authenticity brought frustration to the purists of the music genre. No one wanted to take credit for the word grunge, but the golden band of grunge was also frustrated. Nirvana tried to take a step back from the pop culture by doing a less mainstream album, In Utero, and by showing on interviews their disdain for this kind of fame. Somehow it made people love Kurt even more, and some of his quotes will stick forever. Grunge is still part of popular culture, more as a fashion style than music genre. Pearl Jam became one of the most famous bands in the world. Soundgarden is touring right now, and kids all over the world are still wearing Nirvana shirt and idolizing Kurt Cobain. As Eddie Vedder once said, "When commerce is involved, everything changes."